So I had a question sort of for all three presenters, but especially our last one here. You all use technology in various ways, of course, to interact with your students, and I'm curious as to what you do to accommodate for students who are from lower income backgrounds who may not necessarily have two electronic devices in their backpack at any given time. It's a little bit different when you're doing, for example, making videos of how you understand projects, because that's sort of available in a computer lab setup. So for homework, I could see that, but in the actual classroom, what can you do for that?
I have, I guess, the pleasure of teaching in the engineering school for this class, and Archie can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's a requirement now for all engineering undergraduates to own a laptop, basically. And so that's accommodated. You have to answer how that's accommodated, but everybody has to have a laptop, and I make it clear from before class that they're expected to bring it and interact electronically in class. So I do have non-engineering students come to class. That is true. I had a biology student in class this semester. He had a laptop, so it wasn't an issue. Now, what I can and have done, usually because batteries go dead, is I also bring my iPhone and my iPod and my iPad and have devices available for the few students who that day their battery died or something happened. Or I can do things like we did here. It's perfectly fine to work with a neighbor. My class is taught in an interactive way the way that we just did. So we don't do tests where you're sitting very quietly scribbling equations as fast as you can remember that have nothing to do with what you're trying to answer. Instead, you're discussing with your neighbor, what's the idea, what am I solving? And then the last few minutes of the test is, okay, you've had your chance to discuss and get the idea, now write your answer, okay? So we don't do tests in the traditional way, and it's all interactive, so maybe that addresses the question.
Your session is so interactive. Great presentation. Two very quick and small questions. The first one is, do you do grouping every time in your class? Number two, what grouping techniques or strategies do you use in your class to make it more effective, interactive, and successful?
Okay, so the first question was about grouping. So I've done it both ways. Most of the time, our class is simply interactive chat with your neighbor. And the students tend to sit with groups that they're comfortable working with. And especially the biomedical engineering curriculum, at the same time, they're doing a very group-intensive lab course, and so they're used to working with each other in that way. We do a group project in the class where I assign the groups. And for that, I've used CatMe, was the tool I used this year, catme.org, to try and assign groups based on schedule alignments and some other factors it's catme.org, CATME.org. So I've done it both ways. There are pluses and minuses to each.
I love the idea of teaching them how better to use Google or whatever search engine they're using. But I was curious, have you already sort of sussed all those search words out to see which video is going to come up most likely? I mean, it always seems tricky for me to sort of try to predict where they're going to go or what's going to happen so that I can teach off of that.
Okay, I'll admit it, today was rigged. For time purposes. If this were my class, what we did today would take 45 minutes or an hour, just what we did today. And so, yes, I prepare by trying to think about if I were a student, where would I get stuck, what would I search, what would I look for that might help me. And so I do spend a lot of time preparing for class by Googling and following those links. When I come to class, I'm pretty familiar with what are the top 10 or 15 links that a student might find with the first search words that come to mind. I also, so that helps a lot because when they say, I found this, I usually already know what they're talking about and I can pull it up quickly. Sometimes they find something different. I ran into a problem with class this year on one of our definitions where most of the class wrote a definition that did not apply at all to the problem we were working on. It was a Wikipedia definition. It was a perfectly good Wikipedia definition if you're a physicist working in a particular area of physics. That was very different from the application that we were doing in transport engineering. okay? So that was a case where the students just simply didn't have enough professional experience to make a choice about what applied to the problem and what didn't. And so we spent some time in class exploring what are the differences between that definition and our definition, why do those differences exist, and how do I adjust my equations to follow up on that. It was something that I didn't predict. I didn't know it was going to happen, but I build padding time into the class for these kinds of discussions. I also use a flex schedule in the class, so the syllabus doesn't list day, topic, day, topic. The syllabus lists a list of topics, and if we get to them, we get to them, and if we don't, then we've explored something deeper and they've learned more about that, and that's equally good.
My question is for Claudrina. I'm Michelle Kitzliak in the music department. Claudrina, you mentioned that one of your grading rubrics is how engaged the students are in the website, and I was curious how you measure that and whether that also is maybe just a strategy to make sure they do engage as opposed to really a way to measure.
I think it's part strategy and part engagement. I mean, you can really measure it. So, for example, the portfolio, they had to reflect on interviews that were on the website. And if they clearly had the person's name wrong, had the school wrong, you know, there are certain things where it's clear that they didn't engage. I think there's also technology where you can see if students checked onto an article. I can't quite go there yet. That's a bit too, you know, but you can do those kind of things. But you can tell the level of engagement from the actual, the things that they have to turn in from the interview on. So if there was a question, a burning question that you just, that I knew, okay, you know this about Ralph Sampson, and it was in the article that you had to read, and it's not reflective in the interview, I can kind of tell. Now, the difficult thing with doing group projects is, you know, it's a group, and so you can't punish, you know, the individual too much for the group. But I set up things to make sure that they engage. But I think it was more of a scare tactic, you know, as part of the grade than something that I measured completely, but I did measure it.